Hello there, this is the second part of the 614 lesson, and we're going to finish the reading and then complete the rest of the activities. And we left off here, threats elsewhere in the world. In addition to major military commitments in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Bush administration faced threats to peace and stability in other parts of the world. North Korea's dictator Kim Jong-il appeared to be intent on manufacturing nuclear weapons. So did Iran, which was governed by a conservative Islamic coalition. In the summer of 2008, Russia, showing signs of aggression reminiscent of the old Soviet Union, ignored international appeals and dispatched tanks and troops to protect two breakaway territories from the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. Closer to home, a murderous all-out war between competing drug cartels in Mexico increased tensions along the southern border of the United States. The Bush White House registered impressive foreign policy accomplishments in Africa, where the disease of AIDS had reached pandemic proportions. President Bush substantially increased funding for millions of AIDS victims throughout Africa. When constant fighting in the region of Sudan called Darfur led to a humanitarian crisis, Bush threatened economic sanctions against the Sudanese government, which helped to reduce the violence in Darfur, although the humanitarian crisis continued. All right, let's read this excerpt before we continue on. The controversy over Guantanamo. The Bush administration transferred about 500 suspected terrorists and Muslim militants captured in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere to a special military prison located on the grounds of the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Many of the detainees, whom the Bush administration labeled enemy combatants, were imprisoned for 5 years or longer without any criminal charges or legal protection. International criticism began to mount as reports of the mistreatment of prisoners, even acts of torture, leaked from the base. These reports came only months after photographs revealed that some American soldiers had abused prisoners at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. The Bush administration countered that enhanced interrogation techniques were required for such potentially dangerous terrorist figures, including the mastermind of 9/11 and other al-Qaeda and Taliban leaders. Both the European Union and the Organization of American States issued rebukes of the United States for its policies and practices at Guantanamo. Even the United States Supreme Court, in two separate rulings, upheld the prisoner's right to a trial. In early 2009, President Bush's successor in office, Barack Obama, ordered the facility's closure within 1 year. Okay, the fury of Katrina. On August 29, 2005, the United States experienced the worst natural disaster in its history as Hurricane Katrina, a monstrous storm, slammed into the Louisiana and Mississippi Gulf Coast, leveling homes and businesses in a fury of winds as high as 175 miles an hour. The powerful winds and tremendous storm surge, the huge dome of water that sweeps across the shore where a hurricane makes landfall, devastated the city of New Orleans and surrounding areas. In the end, more than 1,800 people lost their lives to Hurricane Katrina, and property damage estimates were in the tens of billions of dollars. Days before the hurricane made landfall, officials at the National Hurricane Center, who had been tracking the storm's path, warned federal, state, and local officials, as well as Gulf Coast residents, that the storm could be severe. The mayor of New Orleans urged the city's people to evacuate. Nearly 400,000 city residents evacuated, and more than 1 million people left the general area. But about 100,000 residents, many of them poor blacks, had no cars and no money for other transportation. In New Orleans, a city known for its jazz musicians, eclectic cuisine, beautiful architecture, and extravagant Mardi Gras celebrations, tens of thousands of residents lived in extreme poverty, and most of the poor were black. The majority of the poor of New Orleans lived in low-lying neighborhoods most prone to flooding. With no means to leave, some 20,000 people sought refuge in the city's convention center, and 25,000 went to the Louisiana Superdome. Thousands more stayed in their homes. As the floodwaters rose, stranded people climbed onto rooftops. There was nowhere else to go. Television crews were on the scene soon after the storm subsided, but the massive aid required did not arrive nearly as quickly. Hot, tired, and thirsty people waved signs as they stood on rooftops and cried for help. Looters waded through waist-deep water to steal supplies. The high waters trapped thousands in the stadium and convention center, including the elderly and infirm, small children and babies without sanitation or enough water or food. Dead bodies floated in the flooded streets. Katrina was a natural disaster of enormous magnitude, but human activity also played a part in the devastation. Over many years, the wetlands that helped protect New Orleans from the effects of big storms had been filled in and enveloped. Oil drilling had also taken a toll on the wetlands, as had nature itself. In the years before Katrina, government funding for wetlands protection and restoration faced severe budget cuts. New Orleans also relied on a system of levees, high earthen embankments, and concrete flood walls constructed to hold back the water of Lake Pontchartrain. But during Katrina, breaches or failures in the flood walls led to severe flooding in 80% of the city and spurred a series of investigations to determine why the failures occurred. City and state government officials faced criticism for not doing more to evacuate residents ahead of time, but the harshest criticism was leveled at the Bush administration. It was days before National Guard troops arrived to distribute food and water. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, did not respond quickly enough to the situation. Neither FEMA's director nor other top FEMA officials had adequate experience in emergency management. President Bush acknowledged that the initial response to the disaster was not acceptable and promised more aid, but the public's perception of the Bush administration's response to Hurricane Katrina remained largely disapproving. The election of 2008, and I believe this is where we stop. Okay, so we're going back now. Be sure that you filled out your reading guide and check out your answers with the lesson answer key. And then let's continue on to the next part of today's lesson. It says complete the timeline Iraq war activity. I assume that must be on the reading guide. Let's check it out. No, going back. Perhaps it's in the student guide. Okay, here it is. The editor of a book on the Iraq War has asked you to create a timeline of war for the book. Space is limited, so only the most important items can be included. You'll have to evaluate the events carefully and choose those that are most relevant. Fortunately, the editor has given you the following items as a starting point. Choose the 10 you feel most communicate the important information about the course of the war. Create a timeline using these 10 events. Add a few sentences at the beginning of the timeline to introduce it and explain why the timeline captures the highlights of the war. And there you have many timeline events. And just informally, this is not an assignment or anything that you turn in, just for your own review and learning. Just go through and decide what you would include as a top 10 events. Just do it kind of informally and just read through the different events to review the timeline of the Iraqi war. Alright, and then going back to finish off today's lesson, you just need to complete the 6.14 checkpoint. So don't forget to do that, and best of luck to you.